Charles Albert Fiedler. Why I was named that? Because my mother told me that. I was born in Spooner, Wisconsin, August 14th, 1921. My mother had many times said, I don't know why I didn't drown you when you were a pup. Mother said it was Charles, and that's all she would call. And when she said it in a certain way, you knew you were in trouble. My granddad, that he was, when I was a kid, he was a mammoth man with a big, solid mustache. And as I got older, he got smaller. And when he died, he could almost walk under my arm. He did shrink, but primarily it was just the memory of him as a kid, I guess, that he was so big. He worked on the railroad, building railroads, running a Fresno, a team of horses in Fresno. And he worked 12 hours a day and more. For lunch, he wanted 1 dozen eggs with mashed potatoes. 1 batch of mashed potatoes, 1 egg, 1 potato, 1 egg. My grandmother said one day she only had 11 eggs and she heard about it for a week. My mother, I never knew anything about her childhood or upbringing until after Gail and I were married. We were out in western Minnesota fishing. Gail stayed home talking to Mom, and Mom was telling her about her life and that she was a kid, swam across the Mississippi River in Dubuque, Iowa. I didn't even know she could swim.
How is the world different now than it was when you were a child?
It was less complicated then than it is now. Living on a farm, we raised pigs, we raised cows. My mother raised chickens and ducks and turkeys. We always had plenty to eat. We had corn in the field, and we had sweet corn in season. We had apples in season, tomatoes in season. Can't say that I was ever hungry.
Is there anything you miss about being on the farm?
The peace and quiet, yeah. The lack of a telephone was one of the best things that ever happened. We never had a telephone on the farm at home, but people that did were generally on party lines where every time somebody called a neighbor, all the other neighbors were on the line listening. So, favorite games were primarily card games. We used to play whist, we used to play euchre. I couldn't play either one of them right now. My first school was a one-room school located about a quarter of a mile from the house. We used to have to go down the driveway and down the street and back into the school. The fun part was to go over the fence, and it was a lot closer, but my mother was a little bit put out when we would do that, especially when I went over the fence with a brand new pair of pants on and ripped from one end to the other. That made her very unhappy. The second school that we went to was, when we moved moved to a mile from school, so we walked to school then. Then we moved to another farm 4 miles from school. The third school, I went back to the one-room school. That was in Brampton, North Dakota. That was the first school I went to in town, yeah. And the second school in town was at Cogswell, but that was the fourth school that I went to. And that was 2 miles from home, and again we walked to school. That was a kindergarten through high school. And that was torn down about sometime in the 70s. The land is now a park.
What was your favorite subject in school?
Recess. I can't really say that I had any favorite in school. Probably history would probably be my most interesting one. History, and I kind of liked English, but don't use it too well, but I liked it. Easiest was recess, really.
Do you remember one that was particularly hard for you?
Yeah, Latin. Latin was a required subject in North Dakota at that time, which would be 70 years ago. Required if you wanted to go on to college. You had to take Latin. And I could not get Latin in my head. And I took, I think, about 1 month of Latin. And I was taking 5 subjects that year, and I just folded up my book and I laid it down and I went to my history book. The teacher says, "You're supposed to be studying Latin in here." I said, "I ain't taking Latin." She said, "Yes, you are." I said, "No, I ain't." And I didn't. But I had my 4 subjects, so that's all I needed for the year anyway. So.
You remember a favorite teacher?
Yeah, I do. She was a little redhead. And she tried to get me to learn more. And she was a nice lady. I saw her, this was back in, what, 1987. I went out to the 100th anniversary of the town that I lived in, out to Cogswell. And they had of course, big to-do going over the 100th anniversary. And I saw her and I told her, I said, "You know, you were my most favorite teacher." She didn't remember me. Harriet Iverson.
Harriet Iverson. Did you have any extra activities or sports or anything that you did?
Pitch hay. Living on a farm, we worked 7 days a week. We never even went to church. Us kids Bill and I would take off and go to church, but then get back home or back on the farm again. So very seldom do we have any time off, even on Sundays. That was back in the Depression days when everybody was working for a living.